more like our sister church, the Branch Church over in Alger Heights on 28th Street. You've had their Pastor Chris for 3 Sundays. This is your third with me, and this will finish the series. We in this series have turned our attention to a book in the Bible, in the Old Testament, that is approximately 3,000 years old. The book of Proverbs, written or collected by wise King Solomon of old, David's son. Just pause for a minute and realize that there is pretty much nothing else in your life that's 3,000 years old that you care about or listen to or would even think is relevant to your life. You have a cell phone that's a year old and you think it's obsolete. How about a 3 millennia-year-old book in the Bible? And yet I hope you have found that as we've talked about some of the subjects that you find in Proverbs, actually, the Proverbs have a very important voice. They tell us how we can live smarter, how we can live better, how we can live wiser, about some of the most important things in our life, like money, or words, or, in the case of today, friends. I think most of us would agree with that little quote up on the left of the screen, that friends are the most important ingredient in the recipe of life. Most of us, even if we're not experiencing that today, would aspire to that kind of thing. We want that quote to be true of our lives, which then makes me wonder, how's the recipe of your life today? How's the most important ingredient to it? Who are those people that make up the most important ingredient to your life? Now recognize with me that when you and I use the word friend, we actually don't mean one thing. We actually mean several things. If you're more extroverted by nature, which is 75% of the room, studies would say, then you have lots of friends. You have friends at work. You have friends at your kid's school. You have friends in your neighborhood. You have friends at church, and on down the line. You have friends online if you're young enough, right? And on down the line. But the quality of those friendships probably varies from person to person to person. Some of those friendships are simply a matter of proximity. You guys have been close enough together long enough because you work at the same place for 8 hours a day that you just had to be friends at some point. My wife and I, by the way, as an aside, she's not here this morning, but she would tell you this story if I didn't. My wife and I met in pastor's school, which is seminary or pastor's graduate school, and the particular one that we met at only had about 8% women students. So Heather likes to say that the reason we really got married was just proximity. For her, it was just like percentages. She was going to get asked out a lot by the 92% of the student body that was male, and eventually it just worked out in my favor. For you guys, and for me, another one of the ways that we determine who our friends are is affinity. Affinity. You know what that means? It means you have things in common. You tend to have friends that are like you. You tend to have friends who are like your personality, have the same skills you do, have the same hobbies you do. This is how human beings form friendships. Even longevity. If you've just been with somebody or around somebody long enough, you tend to be, at some point, friends with that person. But for the 25% of the room that's more introverted, like me, you don't have as many friends. It's not nearly as widespread. You have fewer in number, but maybe they're a little deeper. But in that one-word friendship, we mean things simply like buddy, acquaintances. And we also, on occasion, mean something richer and deeper than that. Today we want to talk about friendship. In fact, I want you to envision it this way. All of us agree with that quote on the left side of the screen. To one degree or another, all of us sign up for that. We're simply going to ask Proverbs, okay, if friendship is this important to a life well lived, if God thinks it's this big a deal, then tell us how we can be a good friend. Tell us how we can have good friends. Our ears are open. Give us your wisdom. Here's what the Proverbs would say to you. In the 31 chapters of the book of Proverbs, its comments about friendship focus on or localize around two broad subjects. The first one may surprise you. The Proverbs talk a lot, not about who should be your friends, but who shouldn't be. These are warnings, relational warnings that are scattered throughout the collection of Proverbs in the Old Testament. And so, if we want Proverbs to instruct us about friendship, we need to consider who we call our friends and why, and whether or not we should. For instance, one of the classifications of people that on several occasions the proverb says you should not entrust yourself to is someone who spreads secrets. One of the quotes, one of the proverbs up on the screen reads simply, "A person who shares secrets divides close friends." Now, I'm going to bet that everybody in the room at some point has experienced the truth of that proverb. You had a friend, maybe it was even somebody in your biological family, who knew something about you or to whom you entrusted a secret. And at some point down the road, they divulged that to somebody, someone that you didn't want them to. And then maybe it began to spread. Or then maybe somebody else began to whisper behind your back and you picked up on it. Or then maybe somebody very important to you began to look down on you. And all of a sudden, not just one relationship was ruined, but quite a few were. You felt exposed, naked. You felt humiliated and embarrassed. Yeah, I think we've all had that experience happen. This is why Proverbs says if you notice about somebody that they can't keep their mouth shut about sensitive things, delicate things, they should not be a close friend of yours. And by the way, if you're somebody who can't keep your mouth shut, don't expect people to be your friend either. This is the wisdom of the Proverbs. If you want to have people who are close to you, with whom you have relational intimacy, you have to be able to protect confidentiality. They have to know that when they share the real them with you, that it will stay with you until you tell them otherwise. This is the kind of friend you and I need to be. These are the kind of people we need to seek out. The next one is also just as obvious. Don't befriend people who have unchecked anger. Unchecked anger. Now remember, we talked about a couple of weeks ago in this series the opposite of wisdom. How oftentimes in our lives we act like the word in Proverbs is a fool, but we don't know it. And one of the ways, if you recall, that oftentimes we act like fools is that we have unchecked anger. Over and over, the proverb says human beings are marked by this. We are angry people, and largely we're unaware of it. Or even if we are aware of it, we choose to do nothing about it. And your anger doesn't look like my anger. For those of you who are more boisterous or extroverted, your anger is hot and it's loud. And we know it when you're mad. Well, as somebody who's one of the 25% who's not like that, you'll rarely know when I'm mad. But it doesn't mean I don't have anger. It doesn't mean that I don't hold grudges. I don't withhold care from people who have made me mad. It just looks different. See, if you befriend an angry person, you're basically setting yourself up for the eventuality that at some point their volcano is going to go off. And when it goes off, it's going to go off on the people around you, or it's going to go off on you. You are playing with fire, and at some point you're going to get burned. This is what happens and this also explains, by the way, if you're somebody who is marked by unchecked anger, why people don't feel like they can be close to you. I get it. It's painful not to have close friends. There are maybe many reasons why that's true in your life. Part of it could be the way you conduct yourself. People don't feel like they can entrust themselves to you. Here to me is the more eye-opening, the most eye-opening of the three that get the most ink about who shouldn't be your friend in Proverbs. This is a case of the Proverbs in the Old Testament not telling you how the world ought to be, or not telling you how you ought to be, This is a case of the Proverbs telling you how the world actually is. And I appreciate its candor. If you look at those Proverbs up on the screen, what Solomon of old is telling you is that human beings have not evolved much further than peacocks. If you're a peacock, if you're a male peacock specifically, you want to have the brightest, biggest plumage that you possibly can. Because the male peacock with the brightest, biggest plumage gets the hottest chicks. Literally. Think about it. You'll get it. Right? The biggest, brightest peacock gets the greatest mates, the best mates, the most desirable mates. Apparently, Solomon says, if we're not careful, that's how human beings are with their friends. The people who look the best, the people who live in the right places, the people who have the most disposable income to spend on concerts and meals out and trips together are the people that we want to be around. And the poor, the poor can feel left out. The poor oftentimes are not the people who make that list. Solomon is telling us that very often, if you look at who you consider your closest friends, they're going to look a lot like you. Odds are they're going to be your age. Odds are they're going to be your socioeconomic class. Odds are they're going to live in a neighborhood like you. Odds are they're going to have the similar education level as you. Odds are they're going to be the same race as you. And on down the line. And I get it. I know why human beings do that. So do you. Birds of a feather flock together. Go back to the peacock reference a moment ago. We do. People like us tend to be attractive to us. I get it. It's also dangerous. If you only hang out with people like you are reinforcing every strength that you have, and you're also reinforcing every weakness that you have. You are reinforcing the goodness of your perspective, and you're also reinforcing the blindness of it. Now, some of you know of what I speak, because some of you have not just acquaintances, but decent friends, good friends, maybe even great friends who are not like you. They're from a different culture. They're 20 years older than you, or 20 years younger than you. They've chosen to be single their whole life, whereas you got married at age 22. They live in a part of town that's a lot better than yours, a lot nicer or cleaner than yours, or maybe the opposite. And you know that if you have close friends like that, it changes your life. Because you can no longer have these unchecked, unquestioned stereotypes about people. You can no longer generalize in the way that oftentimes we do. You realize that people who are different from you aren't scary. You have similarities you didn't know of. I remember early on in my time here at RiverTree, this is before a lot of your time, so no, I'm not talking about you. Relax, everybody. I had somebody in a small group come to me and say, you know, there's this one couple in our small group that really doesn't fit in. Most of our small group, they're kind of white collar, they're business professionals, and one of the things the guys in our small group like to do is sit around and talk about the stocks that we're trading, okay? Yeah, that small group's not for me either, because that's not my world. But that's what we like to do. And then we have this one couple where they're very blue collar. They kind of live paycheck to paycheck like some of you do. And they just don't fit in. And so we think the best solution is for them to find a small group full of people like them. And I told them no. I said, yeah, we'll do that if we have to as a last resort. I actually think the opportunity here for your growth, for all of your spiritual growth, is to learn how to treat that couple who's not like you as equals. To find things that you can do with them or talk about with them that actually all of you share in common. Can you do that? I might as well go ahead and tell you they didn't take me up on that advice. They actually asked that couple to leave their group and find another one. Yeah, that's exactly what Solomon's talking about here. We are a church by nature, I am glad to say. Actually, one of you and I were talking about it before the service today. We're very diverse. The only thing we're not diverse in is race. Everything else is extraordinarily diverse. And we work very hard and intentionally at avoiding what Solomon is talking about here. You should too in your friendships. Otherwise, your potential and your growth as a human being is going to be diminished if you only run with people like you. Now, here's the other subject. So Solomon talks a lot about friends and who shouldn't be your friend, what you need to be wary of. Okay, well and good. Here's the other thing that Solomon in Proverbs says a lot. Solomon would tell us we need to be very purposeful to set the bar on friendship high enough. Most of us have friends. Most of us would use that term about more than one person in our life. But Solomon would say, do you set the bar for what you want out of your friendships high enough? You need to. Here's how C.S. Lewis, the great Christian author of the last century from England, talks about the high bar that Christians can have for friendship. And what you will find as we talk about it more is this is the bar that Solomon has in Proverbs. C.S. Lewis writes in his book, The Four Loves, quote, "Friendship is something that raises us to the pinnacle of being human. This kind of love, free from instinct, free from all duties but those that love freely assumes, almost wholly free from need to put our best foot forward, and free from the need to be proudly aloof, is eminently spiritual. It is the sort of love that one can imagine between angels. We imagine it of God himself. And it isn't romantic, like lovers staring into each other's eyes, yet in opposite directions. No, the way of friendship is between warriors and poets and philosophers and artists and Christians. It is to stand shoulder to shoulder, fighting together, reading together, arguing together, imagining together, and praying together." I love that first sentence. Do you believe it to be true? Friendship is something that raises us to the pinnacle, the very height of what it means to be human. Here's why Solomon says that's possible about friendship for you and I. Here are two of a related set of proverbs about friendship. Solomon writes, "A friend loves at all times, but a brother is born for adversity or hostility. A man of many companions may come to ruin, but there is a friend who sticks closer than a brother." What Solomon is saying here is that you and I can set the bar for our friendships this high. You can have friends who are as close to you as family, maybe even closer. You can have friends who are as close to you or closer to you than your biological kin. Your father, your mother, your children, your spouse. Now see, some of you know the need of this. Some of you did not come from a family of origin that was kind or encouraging or uplifting. Some of you came from angry homes, judgmental homes, abusive homes. And you have had to find out through experience that because your family was so destructive, you had to have friends who did what they did not do for you. For some of you, it's not that nearly that egregious. You may be more like me, which is I have not, since the age of 18, lived within more than 7 hours in a car to my family. And most of my life, I've had to get on a plane to go see my family. So Solomon is actually logistically, pragmatically true in my case. If I am going to have meaningful, deep, intimate relationships, then I had very quickly in my life to get outside of my family of origin. Just out of necessity. Some of you know that too. Here's the thing. All of us need to recognize the truth of this, not just those of us who come from bad family backgrounds. And by acknowledging this, you're not admitting that your family is terrible. You're not dissing your family. You're not running your family down. But all of us need to see the truth of this. the good of this. You don't know my family of origin. You don't know my dad. You don't know my mom. You don't know my older brother Richard. You don't know my younger sister Sarah. I wouldn't trade my family of origin for yours. No offense. And I think we have lots of good families here. I'm keeping mine. That's how much I think of my family. Now, you do know my nuclear family, my current, immediate family. You know my wife, Heather. You know my daughter, Shiloh. You know my son, Eli. I'm not trading them for your family either. And I think we have great families here, full of great moms and dads and kids. But I'm keeping mine. That's how much I think of my home life and the family that God's given me. But that said, I still think that's true for me. I had several conversations with my son Eli in the last month that bears this out. About a month ago, he comes and sits to me on the couch in the TV room in my house, and he just made a mistake. He just did something that was wrong. Now, if you know my son and you know his personality, Eli never does anything that's small. So when Eli makes a mistake, it's gargantuan, right? Because with him it is all or nothing. There is no in between. God loved that little guy. And so he just did that. He just pulled a really big atomic bomb-sized mistake that actually hurt somebody else in our little family unit. And so we're processing this together. He comes and sits next to Dad, and he says, "Man, I really blew it, didn't I?" And I'm like, "Yeah, you kind of did." He goes, "Wow, what can I do here?" So we talked about the idea from the story of Zacchaeus in the Gospel of Luke about making amends. Not only should he apologize, but maybe he should do something concrete to try to make amends for the mistake that he made. And he actually came up with a couple of ideas. Then he said, well, will this person, obviously it's not me, so we're down to the women in my house. It was either Heather or Shiloh that he had done this to. He said, well, will that person forgive me? Will they love me? Will we be okay? And we got to talk about forgiveness and how, yeah, you hurt their feelings and they're upset with you right now, but how we roll in our family is we're going to forgive each other the way we want God to forgive us. So yes, you'll be okay. And he said something to me at the end of that conversation that I'm going to hold right now, because he said it to me again 3 weeks later. Because my son's 11, and now he's passing into puberty. And so things are happening to him that I'm not going to go into detail about, but if you've been through this, you understand, or if your sons have been through it, you understand. So we had a very candid conversation at the very same place in my house 3 weeks later about all these things that were happening in his life because he's getting older now. And at the end of that conversation, he said to me the same thing that he said to me at the end of the first one about this mistake that he had made. In both cases, he asked me, "Dad, could you talk like this with your dad?" And my answer to him is no. I couldn't. And there's almost nobody in the world that I appreciate and love and respect more than my dad. But the answer is no. I couldn't. I could not talk about the embarrassing nuances of puberty with my dad. I could not talk about the big mistakes that I made as a kid or that I make as an adult. I couldn't. That's just not how the wiring in my family of origin worked. And so I told him, "Eli, but I have had friends in my life with whom I could talk about all that stuff. And sometimes the people change. I don't have many friends from when I was 20, now that I'm 45. But God has always given me people who could be my friends, who are as close as family, if I were willing to invest in the relationship, work on it with them, spend time with them. God has always proven this to be true for me. He has always given me people that weren't my family with whom I could have those conversations, and others like it." You would find that to be true too. In a proverb that I didn't read, Solomon says, oftentimes when this gets proven most true is in seasons of distress. That's Solomon's word, distress. When you go through the worst of it, whether you see it coming or when you don't, when you get surprised by pain or hardship, oftentimes the people who will carry you through that are your friends. When you wake up and you realize that you have a glaring character deficiency that you have not addressed for the first 50 years of your life, the people you will often be able to go to first are your friends, not your family. There is a safety, there is a transparency that you can cultivate in friendship that we just sometimes struggle to cultivate in family. This is the high bar that Solomon sets for what friendship can be. Now, if you think that's high, check this one out. On numerous occasions in the Proverbs, Solomon says, another key role that friends need to play in our life goes as follows. Here's the exact quotation from one of those Proverbs. Faithful are the wounds of a friend, but many are the kisses of an enemy. Faithful are the wounds of a friend, but many are the kisses of an enemy. You know how you can tell who your best friends are? Who your most trusted relationships ought to be? It's the person who tells you the things you need to hear, but you may not want to hear. It's the people whose wounds in your life are faithful. Now, you may think to yourself, I'm not sure I want that. And I get that. Because as human beings, we all want to avoid pain. We all want to avoid discomfort. The people that we are the most blind about in our lives is ourselves. We all think we have it together more than we really do. We think we hurt people less than we really do. We think that our words and our actions have less consequences than they really do. This is just what it means to be human. And friends can help rectify that because their wounds are faithful, Solomon says. You got to have at least one person in your life, hopefully more than one, maybe two or three, who can say those things that you need to hear in a gentle, delicate, but direct way when you need to hear them. Do you have those people? Have you set the bar high enough in your friendships to have somebody who fits that bill for you? Now, here's the deal. You have to give people permission to do this because they're not going to do it if you don't tell them they can. I'm going to go ahead and confess something to you as a pastor. I've been doing this now for over 25 years, which is a long time when you say it. And I have learned that when people say, hey, I need to get together and talk to you about something, I'm more than ready to do that. If you guys call our church home, you know that it's one of the things I love the most, is getting together with you for coffee or a beer or friends of yours that you refer to me. I love that when you do that. I have learned, however, that them getting together with me over coffee to talk is different than them asking for my advice. I don't give advice unless I'm asked. Especially the advice that I know that's not going to go over real well. It's easy to offer people encouragement. There's always needs to be more of that in the world. So I try to be very affirming in what I say to them. I try to find something in how they're handling the situation that I can encourage and say, do more of that. But the other stuff, like helping them maybe rethink what they're doing or how they're viewing something, yeah, I don't do that unless they give me permission. And your friends are no different. They're too polite. They want to keep the relationship intact. And so they want to make sure that it's fun, that it's happy, that you enjoy your time together, that you're always supportive and you pat each other on the back. And these are all crucial elements of friendship. But there have to be people in your life that you have given permission to tell you what you need to hear, when you need to hear it, even if it may not be what you choose. Even if it may not be the easiest thing. And you can also recognize, right, that if a friend gives you that permission, there is almost nothing more valuable in your life. You better handle it well. You blow it one time, you come off like a blowhard, or you come off as critical and nasty, and they will slam that door in your face, and the relationship may never recover. So if someone does entrust you with it, be very, very careful with this particular part of what it can mean to be friends. Side note, if you're married like me, your marriage ought to look like this. And many don't. Because we have learned over the years and the decades together that we just want to get along to go along. We just want to keep the peace. And at some point, fighting or talking about the harder stuff just wasn't worth the price anymore. And at that point, you and your wife, you and your husband are no longer that kind of friend to each other. You don't have to do this in a nasty way, in an aggressive way. But at the very least, your spouse ought to be the person who can play that role in your life. Who's the person in your life to whom you've said, your wounds will be faithful to me? I trust you that much. That's how high the bar of friendship is for Solomon. This is a little bit of a distinct topic in our series, and here's how. A couple of weeks ago, the other Pastor Chris from the branch was here, and he talked to you about what Solomon says in Proverbs about money. And what Pastor Chris did is he talked about all the things in the Proverbs that Solomon says are more valuable than money. And you could take something from that list that he mentioned, and you could leave here, and that week you could do something immediately about it and probably see tangible effect. When I have done messages in this series for you, we've talked about mental health and what the Proverbs say about your heart and your heart's well-being. You could take something that we talked about from that sermon that day, and you could immediately put it into practice and probably see an effect, a tangible effect in the next 7 days. I don't know that this works that way. You and I both know that you can't make friendship happen in a short amount of time. Friendship, the kind of friendship that Solomon's talking about, the kind of friendship that rises to the high bar that he sets, it takes long-term investment. It is, in the great phrase of Eugene Peterson, a long obedience in the same direction. You don't see the payoff until down the road. So really, when you think about using some of what you've heard today, you need to think about how to take first steps. Start moving toward something. Maybe you were convicted today that one of those character traits we talked about is true of you, and maybe that's why people aren't close with you. You can start to go to work on that. You won't fix it this week, but you can start to go to work on it. Maybe you look at your life and go, you're right. I hang out with people who are all like me. And I can now see that that limits my viewpoint on the world, even God himself. I want to try to start to fix that. I want to start to reach out to people who aren't like me. Great. That's not a quick fix, but you can move in that direction. If you want to have friends who are as close or closer than family, it's going to take time to get there. But you can start to identify who those people might be. You can begin to reach out to them in their distress if they're under it right now. You can reach out to them if you're in distress right now. Maybe you have that first conversation with a friend this week about knowing that you need them to tell you what you need to hear, even if you don't want to hear it initially. You can start to move that way. All of those things have one commonality, which is if you and I really believe that friendship is one of the most important ingredients to a life well lived, then you and I have to begin to change some of our priorities in life. You and I have to begin to prioritize friendship. This is how John Ortberg, the great writer and pastor of Menlo Park Presbyterian in California, says that. In his book that's worth buying just for the title. The title is Everybody's Normal Till You Get to Know Them. He writes about prioritizing friendship this, quote, People rarely drift into deep community. Psychologist Alan McGinnis notes that the number one rule for entering into friendship sounds deceptively simple. Assign top priority to relationships. We try to create community in a 21st century timetable, and it doesn't work. Intimacy requires chunks of unhurried time. If you think you can fit deep community into the cracks of an overloaded schedule, think again. Wise people don't try to microwave friendship. You can't do community in a hurry. You can't listen in a hurry. You can't mourn in a hurry, and you can't rejoice in a hurry. Many people lack great friends for the simple reason that they have never made pursuing community a high priority. Maybe that's the step you and I can take. Maybe that's the first step we can take. Take one of those things that tends to be high on your priority list and maybe replace it or move it down so that relationships can move up. Maybe go to one less of your kid's soccer game so you can go to the soccer game of a friend's kid. Maybe spend 1 hour less at work so you can go have coffee after work with a friend. Maybe don't spend Saturday watching college football, but instead go help your friend who's in distress, who needs to move, who has a housing project that they don't know what to do with. Maybe as we begin to change those priorities just a little bit, we'll begin to see the payoff. If you want to do some more work on this throughout the week, there are some exercises that we've created you can do. They are available to you on that table at the back of the worship area. At the very least today, why don't we pause together and pray about this last little bit of wisdom that King Solomon of old has passed on to us. In this case, about the all-important ingredient to a life well lived called friendship. Would you take a minute and pray about those things up on the screen, and then I will pray for us all.